everyone, and welcome to another episode of Get Out of Rap. Today, I'm really pleased to be joined by Sandra Thompson, who is empathy expert and founder of EI Evolution. Grimacing there, but I was lucky enough at a conference recently to hear Sandra talk, and I was just blown away, as I'm sure many of you have been over the years. So we tried once before, but I'm really pleased that you're here now, Sandra. So thank you very much for doing this.
Well, thank you. And I think it was almost a rugby tackle. Martin, I'm going to be on your show. When are we doing it? So here we are.
It was a very good rugby tackle.
No broken noses. We're all good.
So I'd love to start with why empathy and emotional intelligence? Why is this such a passion for you?
It goes back a little way, and I'll make it brief because otherwise I could be here all day. So I did a master's. I completed a master's in strategic communications, and the invitation, actually, what am I talking about? It wasn't an invitation. I had to do a dissertation, and it was like a blank canvas. And I was at my sister's house. My brother-in-law just bought this book, Emotional Intelligence by Goldman. The whole premise being that you didn't have to have a high IQ to succeed. Oh, mic drop. So I read that and thought, I know, I'll write about this. There's something in it. There's definitely something in it because we've all met those people who academically aren't that qualified in inverted commas, but they have such incredible presence and gravitas, and they're so successful because they are
Mm.
brilliant with people. And so I wrote my dissertation, and can you believe it, Martin? I forgot about that. And then I started teaching for a college in central London. They had applied for a TEDx license. So TEDx is like a regional version of TED. And they asked me if I'd like to speak. And I thought, oh, here it is. Here's the opportunity to dust down that dissertation and then prepare a talk. Now, 20 years on, there is ridiculous amount of stuff on emotional intelligence, but the premise is the same. The premise is the skill of an emotional intelligence enables you to identify your emotions and to manage them better. And I think to myself, that's incredible. I mean, that's incredible because it means that you're not at the mercy of your emotions. And let's face it, particularly in the last 5 years, it's been an emotional roller coaster for all
Mm.
of us. And life is moving at such a pace. We do need to look after ourselves, and we can show up more effectively with this skill. So I guess the reason why I'm so passionate about it is that anyone, anywhere, at any age can learn the skill. And when you are more proficient in the skill, and it's a lifelong journey to learn it and to keep learning it, things are so much better. People are more healthy.
Mm.
There's a study in the States where lawyers who practice emotional intelligence have fewer heart attacks and fewer strokes. There are better relationships. You have a better life. And so I'm incredibly infused by it because I also see the difference it makes to young people and children, little kids being taught how to regulate their breathing, how to manage their emotions, and it's just a game changer. And so I'm a big fan.
I love it. I love that whole, and it's come to me kind of late. Do you find this? I think once you start understanding some of the terminology, and like you, I've read a few books, and it enabled me to look back. And I worked for a wonderful man who, when I was quite a young leader, said to me once, "Look, you wear your heart on your sleeve, and that's great when it's great, but there's real highs and real lows, and you have to remember as a leader." You have an impact about the people around you. So when you're emotional and that's great, and you're bubbly and you're enthusiastic and you're full of energy, you carry people around you. But when something goes wrong or you're unhappy with an injustice and you're raging against the machine, which was my kind of two states really.
Yeah.
He said you've got to find a way to keep that in check. I think were the words he used, and I must admit at the time I was a little bit lost as to how to do that. So the evolvement of our understanding of that now, does it all sit under the umbrella of emotional intelligence, or is there a distinction between that and empathy?
So I want to respond to a couple of things that you've said before I answer that question, if
You
that's
sure?
okay.
Yeah.
So what you've described, I absolutely relate to because I was exactly the same. It was either, yeah, get her in the room, she's amazing, or avoid her like the plague.
She's a bomb
Um,
that might go off.
she's
That's
a
what, yeah.
bomb that I can see it, it's about to detonate. Because I was so passionate about what I
Mm,
did and I felt it. I really felt it,
mm,
everything. And I think that if people can get their heads around this thing called emotional contagion, it will help them consider the impact that they have. Because very often, people don't have the awareness of their impact on others. We have this aura about us, we have an energy about us, and that's the amazing thing about our species, is that we pick up on any slight thing. If we're tuned into it, we can pick it up. We can read the room. We can see exactly what's going on. And the ability to recognize the emotion and to give it a name and to sit with it, as it were, doesn't mean to say that you still don't feel the highs and the lows. It just means that you're able to articulate them in a more measured way. So I can honestly tell you that I still have the wah and I still have the ooh, but I'm able to most often, although the household here might disagree with you, that I'm able to say, that really has annoyed me and I'm frustrated by it rather than red mist and smoke coming out of my ears. Now, in answer to your question, and I love these questions about the relationship between empathy and emotional intelligence. I want to play something out to you, which actually came up in the talk that you made reference to at the beginning of this recording. Um, Empathy on its own, in my experience, is a bit useless. Because if I say to you, Martin, I know exactly how you feel, you must be really frustrated by that, or my brother feels exactly the same, he went through exactly the same thing, it's likely that you'll be like, well, I'm not your brother, and it's not frustration that I'm feeling. And you might think, oh, silly old bat, never mind. Or you might think, don't you tell me how I'm feeling, you've got absolutely no idea. But the interesting thing about emotional intelligence is that it's like the headline, and empathy is one of the 12 competencies within emotional intelligence. So if we master this whole thing of identifying how we feel and then managing how we feel, the chances are that when I'm then trying to be empathetic with you, I'm going to be there for you. And I'm not going to be saying to you, actually, this is what I'm feeling. You must be feeling the same thing, because every single individual is completely different. So when you practice emotional intelligence, it means that you ask great questions and you don't make any assumptions and you don't try and label the other person's emotion because you can't possibly know. So I think that with good intention, we
mm.
teach people empathy in inverted commas, but if we just taught them emotional intelligence first, they will be so much more brilliant at empathizing.
Because you're right, that kind of in that little scenario you played out, it's a bit hit and miss, isn't it? It would be luck
Yeah.
that I would go, yeah, you're right, I am frustrated. Or to your point, well, no, I don't actually feel frustration. Should I be feeling frustration?
Mm.
So for as you know through the team leader community, and you mentioned kind of young leaders and even children, how would you advise people, or what do you say to people around starting that journey to become competent in emotional intelligence?
The first thing is to develop the ability to recognize how you're feeling. Now, that sounds so incredibly simple. And when I was training with Goldman and his faculty, I thought, you're having a laugh, aren't you? I've paid all this money for you to tell me something I absolutely know. And then you have to practice it. And then you realize, to start with, it's actually really hard because you've got to stop in the moment and you've got to sit with it and be quiet and just try and figure out which of the plethora of emotions you might be feeling. And so you can sense that something is rising in you. You feel a bit like, or it's not always negative stuff, it's
Mm.
positive stuff. And you might start to journal. Now, journal sounds a bit kind of like, I wonder if your audience will know Janet and John, a bit too simple, but ultimately, just a couple of minutes a day, if you can, just a couple of minutes a day, take out a book with a pen or a pencil and write stuff down. It's really important to go through the process of thinking about it and then writing it. There's something neurological that happens when you do that. It's like you're clearing your brain and you're making notes about it. And if you're able to get into that practice of making a few notes just for a couple of minutes to start, and then maybe 5 minutes a day, you'll start to understand how you're feeling and what it is that makes you feel not too good or something that makes you feel really great. The other great thing about writing means that you're applying language to it. So there's this thing that neuroscientists talk about, which is called emotional granularity. And it's the ability to find words to describe how you feel. So when someone says to me, how are you feeling? Thesaurus, whereas others might say fine, or they might say grumpy. And when they're able to then sit with it and say, well, actually, I'm feeling jealous or angry or irritated, just using a greater variety of words with greater specification means you then are more able to manage it. So, in short, take some time, which is counterintuitive because we want to go at 100 miles an hour and there's no time to do anything, blah, blah, blah. Just take the time to figure out how it is you're feeling, write about it, and over time, you will become more articulate in describing how you're feeling and then more capable of managing that.
I I've always liked the idea of journaling. I kind of start it and then either lose the notebook or don't really keep to the discipline of doing it. But then for Apple users, it was, I think, about 6 months ago on an update, they sort of automatically gave you Journal, like an app.
Mm.
And so I started doing a few minutes in that. Like you say, at the end of the day, just writing stuff in it about how I'd felt during the day or what I'd been up to. Is there something in the fact that um, I would look back, so I'd scroll back and look for some previous days, and it would be like I was viewing myself as a third person because I'd look at it and go, "Oh, I was raging. I was raging then. That's nothing to get. Why was I so annoyed? Because it enabled me to go, oh, well, I even subconsciously think, well, I don't, that wasn't a real, I didn't really feel that, but I've written like I did. So next time I know that this feeling is only going to last, maybe even seconds. It's happened before. I've written about it and then I've gone back in and gone, actually, everything's fine. So is there something in, as well as because I love the application of what you've just said around adding more value, more meaning, increasing the vocabulary so you can better understand the ingredients that make up how you're feeling, right? So there's
Mm.
50 grams of jealousy, there's 2 tablespoons of irritation or whatever it may be. But is there also something in being able to kind of analyze where you were as if you're looking at somebody else?
I love that. Ingredients. I'm going to take that from you, Martin. I
You're
love that.
welcome.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So if you can imagine for a minute, so you're hammering a nail, you get your thumb, you smack your thumb, you can see it because it's outside of yourself, and you can examine it, and it's pulsating. You put it under the water, it starts to bruise, and then the nail falls off. Yada yada yada. It's outside of you, so you can see it because you can't see your brain. Be a bit worried if you could. Um, this is the best start of that relationship with that thing. I mean, we've the brain is so incredibly sophisticated. Neuroscientists are finding out more every year through MRI scans and etc. But because we can't see it, this is the best way for us to create a better relationship with it. And I think that there's something else that you've said, which is so critically important. When I was being taught how to coach, and I had an incredible coach, a lady from New York who I don't know how she did what she did, but she was utterly brilliant because she was able to spot things almost straight away and ask some of the most incredibly difficult and powerful questions. But she would say to me, just imagine that they're clouds and those clouds pass. And actually, if you're able to practice the skill of emotional intelligence, the wind is running much faster and those clouds will move far quicker. And
I
she
love
also
that.
taught me, yeah, I mean, this stuff will stay with you, right? And the other thing that she taught me, which I actually practiced with some students, so I did some teaching some years ago, and I would say, here's an idea. Let's take that thing that you're worrying about, and we're not going to forget about it, but I'm going to move that thing to 5:30 tonight. I'm going to worry about it at 5:30. It's not gone. I'm not getting rid of it, but it's definitely moved to that time. Okay, everyone all right? Yeah, brilliant. And then the next time I lectured them, how was that at 5:30? What are you talking about? The thing that you were really worried about. How was it? We went back to it, right? Because it's really important. Dissipated, gone. And that's important because it's really important to acknowledge that you're feeling something. So you can't say there's no clouds because there definitely is something, but you do have the choice. You have the choice to say, and this too will pass, or I will deal with that later. I'm giving it respect, but I'm going to deal with it later. Bing, it's gone. So, excuse me, the fact that you've recognized it and the fact that you've made the conscious choice that those emotions are
Mm,
not of service to you, you move past them.
mm. And in that service to you, I imagine there's also something around decision making as well, because making any kind of decisions when you're right underneath that cloud, for example, you're certainly from my own experience, I can look back and think, oh, and this was right from those early interactions as a young leader. You're more likely to make poorer decisions if they're based right in the middle of that kind of emotion that you're feeling, so that the time that you get away from it, you can make a more considered decision that's more likely to be of better service to you and those around you.
100%. So, again, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I've learned a little bit about the brain. And anyone that's listening, if you've not read The Chimp Paradox, I would like to
Mm,
strongly recommend it. But I'm going to talk about a couple of characters from that book. So you've got the chimp that sits in the emotional bit. And then you've got a stick person that's in the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex, really where you do lots of decision making. It's the executive center. It's the newer bit of our brain. And the chimp, who is really helpful, it will stop you from being run over by a bus, but it does tend to react. So what we're talking about here is the chimp is going berserk because it's like feeling angry or enraged. And because it needs to ensure that you, Martin, survive this terrible email that's come through that's wound you up, it's a survival thing. It's going to say to it's not going to say anything actually to the prefrontal cortex. It's just going to cut it off. So we're not doing let's do a list of pros and cons about this email. We're not thinking logically about it. It's email back, bah, 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 you know, bullet points, uppercase, underlined, bold, red, you name it. Whereas if you gave yourself a moment to calm the chimp down, to say, this is what I'm feeling, and the chimp goes, all right, I'm going to take a break. I'm going to have a cheeky little martini. I'm going to relax. And then the stick man or stick person says, now I'm in charge again. Excellent. So let's make a great decision. Let's be as logical as we can about it. Lovely. And that's really what's going on in the brain. We don't make good decisions because our prefrontal cortex isn't engaged. I mean, come on, it's basic brain stuff, but we don't know this stuff because we're not taught this stuff. But if I knew that 30 years ago,
Yeah.
it would have saved me a lot of time and grief, Martin, to be honest.
Someone gave me a great tip actually was they could see me rage typing. And I was like, oh, muttering, I can't believe that director's done this. This is ridiculous. It's never, blah, blah, blah. Um, and it was a peer of mine when I was a contact center manager just said, whatever you are typing, stick it in draft. Do not send. Stick it in draft, write it, but then come back to it. And if you're still happy with it in an hour's, 2 hours time or whatever, then fine, send it. But do not send it now. And that helped. That really did.
And even the saying, you know, I'm going to sleep on that decision. If you've watched the film Inside Out, I don't know if it's a Pixar or a Disney
Yeah,
movie. There's a new one
yeah.
coming out in June. They've got this beautiful scene where they've got a character who's hoovering in the brain. They're hoovering up, they're cleaning up because the main character's gone to sleep and they're doing a bit of spring cleaning. It's all lovely. And that's critical because if
Mm,
you've had a big day and it's been quite perhaps a drama, if you're able to, and not everyone is able to, but if you do have the choice to make the decision the following day, all the hoovering up is done, all the toxins are taken, and you can think far more clearly because your brain has had some chance to process this stuff. And it means that you're more likely to not have to go back to that decision and undo it if you have some time. I mean, again, it seems like, in inverted commas, common sense, but the speed at which we're working, the perceived need to do everything immediately and without a moment's break is not really how humans should be operating. And
mm,
I'm not saying like put your feet up for every 10 minutes in every, 10 minutes for every half an hour you do, but I am saying that if we honor how we feel, we actually save time. That's the irony of all of this. Now, I'm guilty of sending that email, rah, steam coming out of the laptop. I've sent that email, and the amount of time it's taken me to repair that relationship
mm,
was so much more significant than if I put
mm,
it into draft and I sent it a bit later on.
mm. I love it. And so you recommending journaling, and then what else would you say for? And again, I guess I don't know why, but I'm in my mind. I'm thinking new leaders. Where an emotionally intelligent leader is going to be so much better for them and for the people around them and the team that they're leading. Where would you take them to next?
I think listening, and again, this sounds so boring, doesn't it? But there's a really brilliant exercise, and I'd invite your listeners to practice this if they have a minute. So, two individuals sat facing one another. One person, so person A is speaking for 2 minutes, and person B is silent. And then you do that exercise. Person A is talking to person B, then you stop, then person B talks to person A. Silence, but being present, making eye contact. It's remarkable. People feel heard, they've not been interrupted. It feels a bit unnerving at first because you're used to people sort of going to say something. So you're thinking, are they really listening? This is a bit weird. I feel a bit self conscious. But you feel what's called significance. And if you feel significance, you build trust. If you're listening intently, you're going to pick up on a load of stuff that isn't said. You're going to pick up on some facial expressions, some body language, some tonality, some emphasis. And after that, you're going to be able to ask some incredibly brilliant questions.
Mm.
Now, very often, I've seen it, a leader will ask a question, but not be present for the answer, which undermines the individual, makes them feel a bit rubbish, and they think, don't trust you. The leader who pays attention and then also makes reference to that conversation a few days later, a few weeks later, a few months later, is definitely the person who you trust and you're going to work exceptionally hard for because they give you significance. When I worked for the National Trust years ago, I remember the Director General, I was working late one night, the Director General came up to me, which was a bit like, oh my gosh. And I remember her saying, why are you still here? Oh, I'm doing this particular project, but I need to leave a bit early tomorrow. I've got to go and see my dad. He's in hospital. Thought nothing more of it. She said, I wish you well. I hope everything's all right. 3 months later, when I saw her the next time, because she was busy running the whole joint, how is your dad?
Mm.
You're the Director General. You remembered
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
And that, that's a long time ago, Martin. That's like, I'm going to say 25 years ago. And I remember where I was stood. I remember what she was wearing. And I remember thinking, I am going to bust a gut for you because
Mm.
you have remembered not only my name, the fact that my dad was in hospital. What?
Mm. Yeah.
That makes an extraordinary leader. So, my advice to young leaders is please listen, please close your laptop, please put your mobile phone away and pay attention because you will lead in a far more effective way and you'll feel great too.
Mm. Well, yeah, because you retelling that story gave me goosebumps. That kind of the impact you can have as a leader on people's lives in what are seemingly innocuous interactions, but they're so important because you're there for that person.
That's it.
And when it comes to talking about culture, it's made up of all of those types of interactions that are happening around the organization. It's just a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful story, and makes you think. I think when if you must have had this when you tell stories like that, naturally people can relate to it, but then also think, yeah, I've had a leader that made me feel that way.
Mm. And there's only a handful of them. I mean, I've worked in a lot of places before I started working for myself. And it, at this moment in time, seems quite rare. But that means that those individuals just stand out above the crowd. And I think that it is a simple act. We have more distractions than ever. And at that time, there was an awful lot of work to do. This woman was under incredible pressure from the membership, from the trustees, from all sorts of stakeholders within the charity. And yet, in that moment, that's what it is. In that
Mm,
moment, there's that saying, isn't there, that's credited to Maya Angelou, which is about people won't remember what you said, but they'll remember how you made them feel.
mm,
And if we think about emotional contagion and the fact that how you are has a ripple effect, and how the brain, everyone's brains, whether we will admit it or not, we want to be noticed and we want significance. We want to be of value. We want somehow to be recognized in our own way. And if you can give that to your peers and to your people and to your family and to your friends, however that is, it means that you create the type of space that means people trust you.
mm,
Don't ever underestimate trust. And I know that you and I both know that we're long in the tooth, but ultimately, really don't underestimate trust, because it will take you in all sorts of directions when people know you have integrity and that you are there for them.
This kind of very early on, you mentioned about intuition and knowing and being able to feel the vibe of a room, or and then bring your own energy to that room, and that kind of sharing of your energy. Is it more of a challenge now for leaders because a lot of their teams are hybrid or purely working remotely? Is it more challenging, which then lends itself to find really investing in this kind of area of leadership?
It's a really great question. There are so many hugely effective remote first organizations. And when you look at how they behave, you can see how they are able to replicate almost the energy of being physically present. So these are the kind of things that they're doing. The voice is an incredible instrument. It's probably one of the few things that, well, apart from, I'm about to contradict myself, apart from AI, of course, that can, that I got to change how I think about that, that can replicate emotion as well. Written words,
Mm,
fine, but the voice, what you emphasize, your tonality, the speed, the language you use, everything comes across. So leaders could consider leaving voice notes.
mm,
Even more effective, which is what I started to do with a couple of clients that we were working asynchronously, because some of them were down in New Zealand and some of them were over in Portland, Oregon. I'd make little videos and I'd say, diddle do, and this is what I'm going to do, and this is how I've done it. All right. And so the energy was recorded, and you can get a certain amount, can't you, from how people are when you see their face. So in the remote and hybrid environment, I would really strongly encourage everyone, not just leaders, but everyone, to use a multitude of media to communicate. The other thing that is a massive, massive benefit, which I'm working with one client on this right now, is I'm assuming that teams within organizations have got things like team charters, which means I know how you would prefer to be communicated with. I know how you are in your best self, as in what time of the day have you got the best energy. And I basically get a whole set of information from you so that I can be as effective as I can, and I can adapt according to what you need. Because when you're in the office environment, you can see people, they're going to go off to get a coffee and they're going to be busy at their desk. And you'll be able to see when they're full on versus reflective versus doing something creative. Because you can't see them all the time. It's difficult to know, but you could ask. And that's in the team charter. And so that creates the blueprint, for want of a better term, on how it's best to get the best out of Martin. He's fantastic at 5:30 in the morning, starts to dwindle off a little bit at 1, and then is really creative at 4. But do not call him between 4 and 5, because that's when he's doing his incredible work and he doesn't want to be interrupted. That's it.
well, actually, that's pretty accurate.
That's because you've got a dog.
Yeah. And you, just on the, because I love the idea of the video and the voice note. So there was a question in the community from someone who said, I've moved teams and I'm now, uh, my team is made up predominantly of people that are working from home and our shifts are very different. I can never get them all together. And my recommendation was do a video. Just hearing you talk about and kind of mirror, miming that out made me think, oh, actually, I missed a bit of advice, and I wanted to get what you think about this. Is my other bit of advice would be don't overproduce it, because I've seen videos that people have done to their team that they've obviously spent quite a bit of time. It feels a bit scripted,
Mm,
they've edited it rather than just show up as yourself. And if
yeah.
that means that you misspeak or say something funny and you laugh and go, oh God, I didn't mean that, leave that in.
It's exactly true. The more authentic, again, there's so many words I'm using here that I can't stand, but I can't think of another word for it. But there's something called the pratfall effect. And the pratfall effect is, let's see if I can get this right. So there are two scenarios. There's someone who walks up to the stage and gets their trophy, and everyone's like, oh yeah, well done. And then there's someone who walks up to the stage, trips, doesn't fall completely and hurt themselves, but trips, and but they laugh about it, get their trophy, and they get down. Who does the audience like more?
The faller.
100%. And it's
Mm.
not that it's one of those comedy Lee Evans, he's done it on purpose, but it's natural. People are more accepting when you're human.
Mm.
And we also distrust if we think that something is too manicured and too perfect. Our brain is, and I don't know which bit of the brain it is, but we can spot a fake. We can spot someone who isn't, very often we can spot someone who isn't true to their word, unless they're really brilliant at it and they do it all the time and you haven't known any different. So I do encourage people to make things a bit raw and a bit more themselves.
Mm.
There are going to be times, I can imagine, where they probably might not feel like they can be completely themselves because they might think, oh, I'm going to be really unprofessional, or what will people think of me? But equally, I do think sometimes people warm to me because I do mess up and I do go, oh God, I've done that again, because I do. We all make
Mm.
mistakes.
Mm.
And even if you do mess your words up or whatever. Actually, I'm just going to tell you another quick story. Sorry, Martin, you got me on a one here. So I've just been to TED, right? TED is the biggest event in education, I think, in the world. So you fly over to Vancouver, it's a week-long event. A TED talk is like the career thing for your life. And so you have these people who come onto the stage. They've been practicing for 6 months, no joke. They've had a coach to help them. They're representing their organization. They're representing themselves. There is a lot of pressure, man. There are
Mm.
2,000 people. There's lighting, there's sound, there's screens. Wow, you get the gist, right? When these guys mess their words up, the crowd cheers. And there was a lady who was talking about employee experience and she messed up a couple of times. She actually got quite emotional and the crowd stood. They gave her a standing ovation until she felt calm and then she smashed it. What on earth?
Mm.
I just felt emotional just then thinking about it because people are supportive of others, honestly, they really
Mm.
are. And to
Mm.
see 2,000 people cheering someone because they messed up,
Mm.
incredible.
Mm. I couldn't agree more. And just hearing you talk about that, instantly I think about, I think it was a Barcelona Olympics. So 92, Derek Redmond, the 400-meter runner who like kind of got injured, a hamstring or ankle, and he started crying and his dad came on and like gave him a lift, took him round. And I just think, that the whole stadium was behind it. I still remember that vividly. I have no idea who won.
Isn't that interesting?
Mm.
Because the emotional potency was in your reaction to that moment of humanity.
Yeah.
And so, bringing it back to a video, honestly, believe me when I say that if you if you haven't brushed your hair, up to you. If you do mess your words up, if you do drop the computer and all of a sudden they're seeing the dog on the floor and then they see you again, it's human and it's
Mm.
beautiful. And
Mm.
honestly, I really do think the majority of the really strong relationships I have in work, especially, is when someone is okay with not being perfect, and there's a vulnerability and a courage to
Mm,
it. And I think honestly, there's no harm in it. Quite different if you're doing a very serious pitch to a bunch of VC, that might be slightly different. But if it's an internal communication, just be yourself.
mm. And you mentioned the key word there, I think, as well. Does vulnerability play a part? Is that one of the 12 kind of components of emotional intelligence?
It's not identified as a particular competency within the skill, but interestingly, when you are able to articulate how you feel,
Mm,
that in itself does sometimes require courage and vulnerability if the individuals that you're speaking with um, are of the type that it's not a common thing. There's a potential threat that it might be discomfort. It might cause discomfort for the other person. Um, I think the best way that's probably the best way to describe it. The other thing to mention is that so you've got emotional self-awareness. The next kind of domain is emotional self-management. Then it's around about social intelligence. So that's where empathy and organizational awareness sits. And then the final one is relationship management. And in there, a whole bunch of things, including inspirational leadership. And most certainly, when you think about all of those four domains, it's possible that the most inspirational leaders are the ones that share stories about their experiences. And very often, those stories contain pieces of information that means they're opening up
mm,
and they're being vulnerable
mm,
and they're being courageous in sharing things that might not be deemed professional, but it makes them more human.
mm. And those four domains, is it that if you want to become a really good emotionally intelligent leader, you start with self-awareness?
Correct.
And how would somebody go about that?
So it's very much a case of taking a moment to understand how you're feeling, journaling. You might also invite more feedback. I've got a funny relationship with feedback because I am of the opinion that people shouldn't be giving feedback, they should be invited to offer it. So, those individuals who are keen to grow and keen to learn should be asking, could you give me some feedback on that? Or what are your thoughts on this? And so, do that more often. Make it a natural thing that people will expect you to ask them, could you tell me how that is? And if you ask a number of people, then you can take the average of what's being said, because what we also have to remember is that while we ask people for their opinion, it's their perception of what you're doing, and that comes with all of their baggage.
Mhm,
So while they might give you a piece of feedback, it might be very helpful to you, but it might also include an agenda of theirs. So so just to recap, if you ask for feedback and you ask a number of different personality types, then you can build up a picture of how you're coming across. Because ultimately, here's your intention of how you want to be, and here's other people's experience of you.
amazing. And it really, when you think about the world of contact centers and how, in the vast majority, how prescribed it is and seen as a positive that we are going to monitor, coach, and feedback is a big part of that. Getting that relationship established so that it's asked for,
Mm,
but also making sure that you are aware of your own the feedback I'm about to give, how much of this is my perception, how much of this is objective, really then, because I used to, as I got more senior, I really kind of zeroed in on this. How effective are our coaches, our team leaders? Because
Mm,
the power that they hold in that relationship and through the vehicle of feedback is it can be amazing, but it can also be, if they're not great coaches and if they're not competent and sensitive to
mm,
how they're doing it, it could actually do have the reverse effect than what we're hoping for. It's
yeah.
not just a case of, oh yeah, we do it, they do it every day. Okay, well, what is it like?
Mm. So you've reminded me of something I briefly want to share, which is using the skill of emotional intelligence doesn't mean that all of a sudden I'm going to be extra nice. I'm not nice, I'm not extra kind, but I do have an ability to see what's going on and I can choose to adapt to that. And so some people I speak to, so this emotional intelligence stuff, right? Just a bunch of soft skills. Well, they are soft skills, but actually, when you think that people can earn £250,000 more than you when you don't have the skill, and they're more likely to live longer than you, not that soft, is it? First point. Second point is that you can be quite tough with emotional intelligence, but you're doing it in a way that is connected with respect. The person respects you and they're going to listen to you more because you have that ability to create the space that's safe. If you're coaching and you're not specific in the feedback that you're giving, if you're too vague, if you're too woolly, if you don't offer a depth explanation, and also the invitation for the individual to work out how they might fix that rather than being told, you're not doing a good job.
Mm,
And I think that to your earlier point, why are you coaching? Are you coaching because you're not hitting the numbers? Are you coaching because you want that individual to be their best version of themselves? Are you coaching them because you can see every individual here has massive potential? Or are you coaching because you're managing out?
mm, mm,
So the coach itself has to have an understanding of them being of service to the individuals that they are coaching. And that in itself, the word coach to me means someone who's got your back, who's there to support you, who knows your best assets, that's going to bring you to that highest level. Is everyone knowing that? Is everyone behaving that way? Because if you're not, either learn how to behave that way or get another job.
yeah. Let's I would love, I'm going to just throw this out there that you're so knowledgeable and engaging around this. I would love to do a part two because I feel like we're coming to the end and we've hardly scratched the surface. It's been so illuminating. Would you be happy to do another
Yes.
one quite soon? Yeah, great. Let's just end then, if I can ask you, with people that are listening, where would you start on this journey? How would I start and say, I want to do the first bit. I want to become self-aware. What are the best resources other than yourself, or can they come to yourself, whatever it may be? How do I start this journey?
So one thing you could do is you could buy a book which is called Emotional Intelligence 2.0. It's a really easy read. It's quite a small book and it has a code in the back. Take that code and answer a bunch of questions. And what those questions will give you is a measure of how emotionally intelligent you are, so that you have a baseline of what you're actually doing. It also gives you some tailored exercises for you to consider doing, some of the things I've already said, but plus a load of other stuff to help you build your emotional intelligence. It's built around the same Goldman model that I've just described with the 12 competencies. So if you are able to buy that book, I think it's Travis Bradbury is his name. He's got a co-author. I can't remember. I'll give you the link. So firstly, buy that book, take the test, read the book, pick out some things, maybe two, just two tasks that you will build into and become a habit. Two things. And that might be journaling for 2 minutes every day, or it might be taking a breath when you get a rather aggressive or annoying text message or email. But just do two things for 3 weeks and see how you start to change. Buy the book, take the test, start journaling, and do two things. Is that too much to ask? That's quite a lot.
No, it's not. And also, if they're not already, follow you on LinkedIn, follow your content, engage with you, because I've definitely benefited from knowing you and reading your stuff and hearing you talk, and just from this podcast, which is now part one of two.
That's very kind. That's very kind of you to say. Thank you. I mean, because I see such huge potential in this skill, and I've honestly, I've witnessed people change how they are and better themselves.
Mm.
As I say, I'm big cheerleader for it. So yeah, let's do part two soon.
Yay!
Woo!
Sandra, thank you so much for coming on, and I will see you for part two.
Thanks ever so much. See you soon.